Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the channel. I am Brian Lusk. Thank you for joining me tonight. We got a lot going on over the last several days. Let me tell you why it's been several days, though, since I managed to get on and do an update. And that is because, well, I had a daughter. Well, still have a daughter, thankfully. She had an emergency appendectomy. So that's kept me kind of out of pocket for a couple of days. And so I do apologize. She's doing fine. She's out of the hospital and things are on the improvement at this point in time. But I just wanted to let you know why it was a little bit delayed before I could get on to the latest information on Ukraine. Glad to see you, Lucille, Jerry, and Ozzy. Always glad to have you three here, and I'll be looking forward to seeing you throughout all the things. In addition to that, I have had very little time to do robust research, but I did manage to spend some time on breaks and lunch times and things like that, pulling some things together while I've been doing my work. And therefore, it's going to be a little bit weird today, but we're going to be using my cell phone for parts of what's going on so that you can see what I found on my cell phone. Hi, Luciano. Glad to have you as well. Always glad to have you guys here. So you're going to see things like this, where it's going to be my cell phone here instead of my normal computer, and then I'll switch to my computer at times. It's going to be going back and forth a lot. So let's start off with this bit about Vladimir Putin here. And he has put forward his peace proposal, and I'm putting that in heavy air quotes on purpose. You see, Vladimir Putin said that if they want to have peace, we are willing to negotiate for peace with these preconditions. You have to turn over the 4 regions that we have claimed in our constitution that are part of Ukraine. You need to give up on any claim on Crimea. You need to immediately withdraw your own troops out of those regions, and you need to promise to be neutral and not join NATO. That's literally his idea of a starting point for negotiations at this point in time. So one person pointed out here, George Barros, it's probably Barros, stated that Russian forces do not currently occupy 40% of Donetsk Oblast, 25% of Zaporizhia Oblast, 25% of Kherson Oblast, and about 1% of Luhansk Oblast. So they've got their closest in Luhansk and farthest away in Donetsk. So really, you're looking at a proposal that's just chock full of non-starters. As Steve Rosenberg states, in effect, Vladimir Putin is saying, I'll keep the territory I've occupied, plus some territory I'm not occupying, plus Ukraine won't join NATO, plus the West will drop all sanctions against Russia. This is what he's calling a, quote, real peace proposal. So there's some additional bits that came out after this. So let me go ahead and flip to that. And the fact that from, of course, Dutch Prime Minister Rutte stated, the fact that Putin came out with this silly peace proposal yesterday is a sign he is clearly panicking. It's very good news. And Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba stated that Ukraine understands the necessity of future talks with Russia, but these discussions must not be based on ultimatums. He said that Putin's recent ultimatum was seen as a publicity stunt aimed at creating a media wave before a significant summit in Russia. According to Kuleba, the ultimatum did not garner any serious attention at the peace summit, as its intention was transparent to the international community. So let's talk about this peace summit for a bit here. Pop out of here and go into here. And I've got this in 2 parts, just as I've mentioned before. So let's go ahead and pop this over here and bring this up here. Some of this stuff is a little out of order and a little bit crazy getting it all pulled together here. But we'll start with this peace summit that took place in Switzerland. Leaders and delegates from more than 100 countries have come to Switzerland for the summit on peace in Ukraine. That's from Tindar, and that was just kind of summarizing the start there. Macron had a good old time trolling Putin, as he actually came to the summit toting a nuclear briefcase in his wake. Remember, France is a nuclear power. So they certainly have the missiles and the methods to deliver them if necessary at this time. So he just kind of was trolling old Putin for a bit there. Then there were some messages. They did come up in the end with part of this peace summit with a statement, and I'll go through that with you real quick in a bit here. But some other people did come up with some of their own statements, and I'm trying to remember if this is in English
Hence,
or
it is
not.
critical that these principles are also upheld in case of Ukraine. That is why I'm concerned to hear about the so-called peace plans or initiatives that don't even mention these principles. These are the core principles of the UN Charter, the principles that form the basis for securing peace globally. We should be very careful not to leave an impression that some topics and principles, such as especially Ukraine's territorial integrity, are somehow secondary to others. They clearly are not. Upholding these principles is the most important way towards a just and lasting peace. They must be at the core of any future peace framework. The Russian war of aggression against Ukraine has lasted for 10 years. For the bigger part of it, the world has ignored it. There was hope back then, and some are also hoping now, that territorial concessions to the aggressor would bring peace. History has proved that giving up territory for peace has too often led and will lead to further aggressions. To achieve peace, we will have to learn from our own mistakes. Failure to do so would bring a colossal cost in human lives across the globe. Estonia, my own country, went through Russia's colonization and occupation for almost half a century, up until 1991. I grew up during the last part of that time. My own mother, forcefully deported to Siberia as a baby, has suffered from war crimes that Russia inflicted upon far too many. In theory, it was called peace, but it was peace on Russian terms, meaning mass atrocities, meaning repressions, meaning colonization. Principle.
I think too often we forget, at least perhaps willfully ignore, I think would be the better term, what the situation that Russia puts these people through when the Russian world comes for them. This is peace bought on the backs of people who are then enslaved. She's making the case here that number one, it doesn't buy peace. It buys a lull in hostilities. Then on top of that, the people who are the bargaining chips involved in this so-called peace have to deal with the full anger of the Russian Empire. The Russian Federation does not treat these people well or kindly. So this is, as I've heard it said before, is it better to live on your knees or die on your feet? At least if you die on your feet, you stood a chance of getting that freedom that you desire. They did have, like I said, a communique that was signed. There was, I believe it was 90 nations that signed on. The people that were closest to Russia tended not to, including Brazil, India, and Mexico. Though Mexico, I don't think they just really had much of any dog in the fight, if you know what I'm saying. But Brazil and India have often worked very closely with Russia. So we'll be needing to keep an eye on that. Then we've got, let me get this flipped over right here. Like I said, it's a little bit crazy over here. With the peace summit having wrapped, the reports are that they did discuss the 10-point peace plan, but they were focused on three in particular: nuclear safety, food security, and prisoner swaps. That is not to say that they didn't discuss the others, just that these are the ones that came out in this particular letter. The communique, the full text here, in fact, I'm just going to paste that link in here for you to look at your leisure. I'm going to address basically the most important bits out of it and try and jump on it. They talk about the war itself, the suffering and the destruction it creates, and the risks and the crises that it is, in fact, causing for the rest of the world. They discuss the reason for the summit, the hospitality for it, the fact that they had a fruitful exchange of various views, and then they come to the common vision that they've been able to achieve at this summit. Firstly, any use of nuclear energy and nuclear installations must be safe, secured, safeguarded, and environmentally sound. Ukrainian nuclear power plants and installations, including Zaporizhia nuclear power plant, must operate safely and securely under full sovereign control of Ukraine and in line with IAEA principles and under its supervision. Any threat or use of nuclear weapons in the context of the ongoing war against Ukraine is inadmissible. Secondly, global food security depends on an uninterrupted manufacturing and supply of food products. In this regard, free, full, and safe commercial navigation, as well as access to seaports in the Black and Azov Seas, are critical. Attacks on merchant ships and ports and along the entire route, as well as against civilian ports and civilian infrastructure, are unacceptable. Food security must not be weaponized in any way. Ukrainian agricultural products should be securely and freely provided to interested third countries. Thirdly, all prisoners of war must be released by complete exchange. All deported and unlawfully displaced Ukrainian children and all other Ukrainian civilians who were unlawfully detained must be returned to Ukraine. We believe that reaching peace requires the involvement of and dialogue between all parties. We therefore decide to undertake concrete steps in the future in the above-mentioned areas with further engagement of the representatives of all parties. So that's the meat of the statement. 90, I think some countries signed on to it, at least starting with this common vision moving forward. Okay, 80 countries. I had the number wrong there. The ones that particularly refused to sign on include India, Armenia, Brazil, Saudi Arabia, South Africa, Thailand, Mexico, and United Arab Emirates. Now, some of them you can see where they're coming from. India, has relatively maintained neutrality. They have got Russian weapons before, and they do take Russian fuel, but they also like to buddy up with the West, so they're being very careful here. Armenia has just recently kicked Russia out, but they don't want to give Russia an excuse to assault into there. Brazil has always been, well, not always, but has frequently been an ally of Russia. Saudi Arabia, their own oil country, Russia's basically buddy with them. South Africa has recently begun getting really tight with Russia and to a certain extent China, so they're one to watch out for. Thailand, no real news on why Thailand would be jumping in there. The one that concerns me, though, from a U.S. perspective, is Mexico. But then again, they've just had a new president installed, and maybe there's more things going on there. Either way, we need to watch this relationship closely. And United Arab Emirates, another one of the OPEC nations there. So that's the peace summit and the what came out of it. So that's pretty good starting point, I should say. They basically roundly rejected Vladimir Putin's ridiculous demands and started bringing forward some relatively concrete bits that might be helpful for them. Now, there was another interesting thing that happened in Russia that kind of caught my eye. Let me pull it up as well. Like I said, a lot of the research for today was done on the fly during lunch breaks and things like that. So the information is somewhat scattered. Okay, there we go. And blink and flip. Inmates in a prison in Rostov took control of the prison by taking hostages of the guards after breaking out of their cells. The individuals involved, let me see, they're going to get the translation here. No, I don't want to open Telegram. I just want to translate. Translate. There we go. The report is this morning, 2 employees of the Federal Penitentiary Service were taken hostage in the Russian pre-trial detention center number 1 in Rostov-on-Don. So far, the attempted uprising in the pre-trial detention center has been allegedly contained. The Russians have killed 4 English people who were previously sentenced to 18 years for allegedly preparing to blow up the Supreme Court of Karachevo-Cherkassia. In the context of this case, we recalled that it was the employees of the Rostov SFVP who also took part in the aggression against Ukraine. For example, in 2016, we published evidence from the hacked phone of an employee of the Special Purpose Department, Mangust, of the FSVP of Russia in the Rostov region, who repeatedly came on business trips to participate in hostilities in Donbass, etc. So there's a lot of things going on there with this particular prison riot. Now, I did get a later update that stated that the Russian security forces have, in fact, stormed and retaken the prison, killing some of the prisoners who took these people hostage. Basically, they were accused of links to Islamic State. They're supposedly terrorists. But with the Russian justice system being what it is, you never know what actually they were. At least not yet. I'm not going to make claims on it just yet. Now, moving on, there is this political hay being made out of this supposed kill list. And I'm putting that in air quotes again. And a lot of the, like Marjorie Taylor Greene has made hay out of this. They have been talking about this enemies of Ukraine list that's a hit list or kill list. It's not. It's a third-party organization that is basically researching the opposition to Ukrainian aid. And so they've got a list of non-government of individuals and groups that are impeding U.S. aid to Ukraine. This is the Texty organization. I've done some little bit of research on them. They have previously worked with the U.S. State Department and the U.S. Agency for International Development, but this project is not being done with any government funds. It's a volunteer type organization in that regard. And really all it is not a hit list. It's basically keeping track of the things that are going on from people who are trying to stop aid to Ukraine from getting there. Now, their purpose is to research this and understand the ecosystem of mutual support for the from these organizations and individuals, and overall kind of research where this opposition is coming from and what it's doing. They don't have any public support as far as finances go. It's just it's a research project, effectively, from everything I've been able to determine. But because there's a list, and because there's Ukrainians involved in it, the politicians have tried to blow it up into this mega thing. Just that. And just come on. That's just crazy stuff there. They're stretching. They're really reaching to get there. Hi, Eduardo. Glad to see you. And Robbie, I don't think I said hi to you as well, but I might have. I've gotten lost in what I'm doing here. Eduardo, thank you very much. I saw that I had hit 99 earlier today and didn't know that I'd bumped over to 100. So thank you very much. I do appreciate that. And I appreciate every one of you. Okay, so we still got a lot to go through here. The next part is Ukraine. I don't remember if I have anything on my cell phone for Ukraine. So let me quickly jump over here and nope, nothing for Ukraine on my cell phone. So let's keep on going. This is Ukraine's newest naval drone, the Stalker. And it's mainly intended to carry supplies and do a little bit of reconnaissance and patrolling in the sea and river border areas. It does not appear to be armed, at least not in this variant of it. But you know how Ukraine is. At some point in time, they're going to jump on it with some kind of a weapon system. We've seen it in previous reports that the Magura V5 naval drone is now equipped with anti-aircraft missiles. The R-73 air-to-air guided missiles are mounted to the boat, and they can use it to shoot down helicopters. The thing is that the last version of it I saw, the missiles were aimed to the front. So if the helicopter can get behind the drone, The helicopter is faster and more maneuverable than the sea drone, and therefore the drone will not find it impossible to bring those missiles to bear on the helicopter. So they've got to see it coming in order to use them, but still interesting. Russia did launch another attack against the Poltava district on June 17th, hitting civilian infrastructure. Now, they don't specify exactly what it is. Usually, when they are this vague about it, it means it was something important. I just don't know what it is. But overall, again, there are casualties and people may be buried under the rubble. Now, Syrskyi started talking a little bit in a couple of interviews. This is be General Syrskyi from Ukraine, and he's actually kind of positive about the situation as it is right now, stating that time will play in Ukraine's favors once F-16s and more Western aid arrive. With the gradual arrival of foreign military aid, time will favor Ukraine, while Russia's chances of success on the battlefield will decrease. And this kind of he's really kind of extra bullish on the arrival of F-16s. Even in small numbers, at least it means Ukraine will be able to effectively contest the sky against Russian hardware. So there's advantages there. But the kicker, the caveat here, is that Russia knows F-16s are coming, and they know that things are about to change. So they are pushing as hard as they can right now, trying to make as many advances as they can. And to a certain extent, especially in the East, they are succeeding in small bites, day after day after day. As they say, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. But he's saying that once the F-16s arrive, the Russians will find it much harder to continue their advances. And so they want to get as much as they can done right now. Now, Ukrainian authorities have been stating just recently that destroying the Kerch Bridge itself is no longer effective as a strategy. And there's a couple of reasons for that. For one thing, the previous damage done to the bridge has meant that its load carrying capacity has been reduced, and they're not able to use it to transport the heavy equipment and fuel that they need in the quantities they need anymore. On top of that, Russia is actually expending a great deal of assets trying to protect this bridge, including sinking barges and all this kind of stuff around it and trying to keep air defense systems near it. This is a symbolic thing for Russia, but militarily, it's barely being used for any military hardware or equipment anymore, mainly for personnel. And the ferry system is how they get their military hardware into Ukraine, or Crimea in this case. So the overall end result is that the bridge itself is militarily not nearly as high a priority as it would have been a year ago when the Russians were using it extensively for military hardware. So we may see the bridge itself deprioritized. However, it may not be useful for carrying military hardware, but it would be useful for is evacuating civilian populations, such as a whole bunch of scared Russians, out of Crimea. Just pointing out that fact. Now, this is an interesting conversation that happened with the Ukraine Security Council. They are saying that they are not ruling out Russia using nuclear arms if they're facing a catastrophic defeat in Ukraine. And this is, this is them theorizing at this point. But the thing is that Vladimir Putin has said similar things. So take your pick on where you want to go with this one. But overall, they are planning for the potentiality of this happening. Overnight, as in just a few hours ago, really, Ukrainian drones attacked a metallurgical plant and other facilities used for military purposes in Belgorod, Voronezh, and Lipetsk oblasts. And overall, they don't have the damage reports just yet. I did see some things popping up about it, and we'll probably get to that as we get into the Russia news itself. On to the electricity situation. It's definitely not wonderful. The Ukrainians will face lengthy daily interruptions in electricity until the end of July, as scheduled repairs at nuclear power plants put further strain on the country's heavily damaged energy system. So they're also having to maintain their nuclear power plants, as well as deal with the loss of many of their thermoelectric plants and things like that. The situation when they come to winter may mean that Ukrainians may have to make do with 6 to 8 hours of power a day, which is better than what it was originally planned, thinking it would end up being somewhere around 4 hours. And Ukraine became the world's fourth largest arms importer, according to recent reports by Stockholm International Peace Research Institute. So that makes sense. I mean, India, of course, is a massive country. They're going to do a lot of arms deals. Saudi Arabia has been buying up equipment, Qatar as well. Ukraine, though, obviously is going to be high on this list because they need to be bringing in as much hardware as they can. Now let's go ahead and go on to the news out of Russia. And I'm just going to heads up on you. Like I said, a lot of this stuff is heavily out of order. So bear with me as we may be touching on the same things multiple times. Let's see, get this turned on and flip it over. This video, and I'm not sure how well you can see it, probably not well. This is showing a row of T-62 tanks heading to Ukraine. Now, the T-62 is a design that came out of right after the Second World War. It was actually put into service in 1961. It's super simple as far as tanks go compared to modern equipment. Whoops, hang on a second. Let me bump that back. But what I thought was funny here is Igor Sushko, who is the one who provided this information. It looks like his name's cut off, so I do apologize there. Actually put it in terms of games. In particular, War Thunder, which I play quite a bit. And he said, Russia is sending more T-62 tanks to the front. For perspective, the T-62 has a battle rating or effectiveness rating of 8.7 to 9.0, depending on variant. Tanks in use by Ukraine include the T-72, which is 9.3 to 11.3, depending on variant, Leopard 2A4 at 10.3, Abrams M1A1 at 11.3 plus, and the Leopard 2A5 at 11.7, meaning that these T-62s are going to be greatly outclassed on the battlefield. Obviously, a computer game is not a perfect analog for what these things are going to do, but it's just it's hilarious from a certain perspective to see Russia bringing these legacy pieces of hardware onto the battlefield, not even with relevant upgrades or anything like that to make them more effective. Sorry, I'm kind of moving things around here, trying to get my stuff lined up here. There was an electrical substation in Rostov that exploded. No word on if it was a drone involved on it. And you can see the lights flicker out as the systems try and compensate for it overall in Rostov. There was a Russian underground gas storage in the Saratov region that exploded in a particularly impressive fashion here. Let's see if I can get one of the videos up here so it's easier to see. And the interesting thing about this is that it's still burning as of the last I had. So crazy, crazy stuff. This is just a burst pipeline that's up on fire. And as of, let me see, this is from yesterday. As of yesterday, it was still burning and continuing to flame up like that. While I'm waiting for this next one. Okay. Now this is pretty funny. Let me just pop this up here. On the front line, we use these walking tractors to get the supplies to the front line. This is from the Russian side. And if you watch this thing as it goes past, you'll see what he's talking about here.
Вот сила, ебать. Полный пиздец.
How would you feel if you knew that was your supply truck right there? Just saying. Man, I got a lot of stuff over here. I already talked about that earlier, so I'm going to pop on from there. Russia's mobilization continues apace. This case, these are men who were deemed medically unfit for combat, and now they were rounded up and just shipped to Ukraine anyway. Now they are demanding an explanation from the prosecutor's office as how they ended up here. So there you go. The Russians are getting pretty desperate for men. Armenia has been threatening to leave the CSTO alliance. That would be a collective security organization that's basically the opposite of NATO, except on the Russian side. This is pretty nuts here that the Russians would even privately admit that they really have no way of keeping Armenia in. Armenia is a relatively small country. I mean, obviously, everything compared to Russia geographically is small, but this is saying that they really have nothing they can do, and that's because most of their resources are tied up elsewhere. So these Russian officials are now admitting that they're just not going to be able to get them back. Taking a brief pause while this is loading here, Ozzy says, let's see. They are running through Soviet-era vehicles a lot faster than I had thought. Good to see they're on the dregs. Yep, that's those T-62s are basically the dregs. Some of the guys, Robbie says, some of the guys in that Bradley stated video games as credit to know where to hit the T-90. Yes, they did. They talked about being able to use those video games basically as training because the video games are getting detailed enough that they can figure it out based on what the video games are actually implementing these days. It's insane. Yeah, War Thunder's OP, all right. It's a better training than I think anybody expected it to be. But that's the fact is that if you can spend time, I guess you could say, if you could spend the time looking at those vehicles and looking at that equipment in a virtual environment, when you see the real thing, it's going to be far more easy for you to deal with. All right, moving on, let's see. Vladimir Putin appointed his niece, billionaire Anna Sivaleva, as Russia's deputy defense minister. Now, this one caught my eye because it's clear that Vladimir Putin doesn't trust anybody in the defense and their defense Ministry of Defense at all. And now he's trying to stuff the place with his relatives and with nepotism. Which indicates he's getting a bit paranoid to me, at least. And if nothing else, at least he can have his people, including the sons and daughters of people he trusts, be in those vital positions in order to be able to have information that he will believe, even if it's not accurate or useful. I already talked about that earlier. Let's see. And we already talked about this just a few moments ago, but this is at least an image of the attack on the Novolipetsk metallurgical plant, the largest steel plant in Russia. So there's a lot of those types of attacks going on overnight. You can see that things are getting pretty crazy over there, even in Russia. But I've still got more to go because I kept doing the research when I got home this evening. Russian President Vladimir Putin dismissed 4 deputy defense ministers and replaced them with a close relative, the Tsileva that I mentioned a moment ago, the son of a former Russian prime minister, and an economist in an ongoing purge of officials in the Russian Ministry of Defense. Now, they have their own theories as to why this would be. I'm not going to jump into that, but I will just drop the link into the comments here if you want to spend a little bit of time with the Institute for the Study of War, looking at what they think of that situation. From the Ministry of Defense of the UK, the intelligence update, Russia's recently announced tax hikes will almost certainly be used to fund growing financial commitments, including the war in Ukraine. The tax changes are expected to raise additional revenues of approximately 2.6 trillion rubles in 2025. The corporate tax rate will increase from 20 to 25%, and additional tax brackets will be introduced using the new income tax system. The highest income tax rate will increase from 15 to 22%. The additional revenue raised, primarily through the corporate tax increase, will almost certainly be used to fund increasing government expenditures. I have got to flip this around. I just realized. Let me get rid of that and do that. There we go. The government spending in 2024 is forecast to increase by approximately 15% from 2023, but will likely increase further. So you're looking at Russia taxing the prosperity out of their economy in order to fund the government and Ukraine. That's basically what's going on. Now, you remember the A-50 that was shot down earlier this year? There was a couple of them actually shot down over that time period. The Ukrainians claimed that it was their own work. Then as far as their actual, using a Patriot system, that was actually a recent reveal. But there have been other people who are still saying, no, it's an S-300 or something like that. However, the Russians now state that they're confirming that their A-50 was shot down by Ukraine and not by friendly fire. The investigative committee of the Russian Federation confirmed that the Ukrainian Air Force shot down a rare Russian A-50 early warning and control aircraft over the Azov Sea back in February. So we knew it all along. The Russians are now admitting it. Interesting. Russia doesn't like to admit much of anything. According to Ukraine's Navy spokesperson, though, Russian surface warships can no longer afford to be in the waters of the Black Sea, and now they're only deploying submarines in order to jump into to keep patrolling and be able to launch missiles into Ukraine. So it'll be interesting to see what Ukraine is able to do about submarines in the Black Sea. Hi, Al. Glad to have you on board. No problem. Glad to have you here, even if you're late. In Sevastopol, cafes and restaurants revenue fell by more than 60%. Now, this is interesting because Sevastopol, and in fact all of Crimea, is really Russia's premier vacation spot. And we are now in June, so that would make it prime vacation time. And if their revenues are falling by 60%, that tells you that the tourists are no longer coming, they're staying out. So, interesting to see. Thank you, Al. I do appreciate that. And she is feeling much better today, but it's going to be a bit of a recovery time. So thank you. I appreciate it. Now, remember, I mentioned the other day that there was a small flotilla of Russian ships that docked in Cuba. This is showing what's happening with the noise dampening coating that was put onto this submarine. You can see chunks of it are literally falling off, and there is rust underneath. So this is one of their newer nuclear submarines, the Kazan, and this is the state it's in. What in the world? Russia, come on. You're supposedly this big, powerful nation, and you can't even keep the rust out of your submarines. And the information operations by Russia continue apace. In this case, they've been distributing even more false quotes attributed to superstars by the hundreds of thousands. Kremlin bots distributed 120,000 posts with fake celebrity quotes overnight, according to journalist Jason J. Smart. And if you read the quotes, you realize they don't sound like native English speakers. This is something that, if you watch carefully, you'll often see. If you watch carefully, you'll see those little tells for when it's a non-native speaker. For instance, months and months ago, there was somebody who posted a bit talking about how it was back when they were doing that whole Texas separatist movement thing, and somebody claiming to be from Texas said Texas has got all these things going for it. They've got a huge economy and a warm water port. Now, in America, we don't even think about warm water ports. We have ports. Only in Russia do you think about whether it's a warm water port or not. So you watch for those tells. And if you read some of these things, it's clear they're not native English speakers that are working these up. Or as somebody once said, how in the world are they so bad at what they do, considering how often and how much they do it and how successful they are? It just means that they're just, as they say, P.T. Barnum said, which is probably not true, there's a sucker born every minute. Now let's move on to the international front for a bit here, and I've got some international on my phone. Like I mentioned earlier, this research I've been doing kind of on the fly whenever I could get a chance to do it, and therefore things are just a little bit topsy-turvy. Now let's go and do it here, and boop, boop. The U.S. and Ukraine have signed during the G7 summit a security agreement, which includes a supply of entire F-16 fighter squadrons, equipment and weapons for those planes, and Patriot air defense systems to Ukraine. As Tyndar states, this is big. And the having an actual security agreement. Now, understand this is under presidential authority. It's not being put to like it's not a treaty, which would have to go to the Senate for ratification. So the downside to that is that it can be easily overturned by the next president. But it is a big deal. So keep an eye on that. Tyndar then did a nice long post about how China and Russia are not friends. And if the overall situation is that they're basically rivals. And right now they have a reason to work together, specifically to weaken the West. The problem is that from Russia's perspective, by weakening the West, they're also weakening themselves. So, but gradually this pendulum keeps swinging back and forth. But right now, it looks like instead of Russia being on top of this relationship, they are in fact the the vassal state here. Overall, just the constant changes of two rival nations that really don't know what they're doing with each other. Microsoft is claiming that Russia is getting more aggressive in cyberspace. They kind of go through this saying that they are now going. It used to be when they were discovered in a system that as soon as they were discovered, they would bail out and try to cover their tracks as much as they could. Now they're going opposite of that. They're getting super aggressive, trying to lock down the system and maybe ransomware it, anything they can do to cause destruction. They're also kind of using this as a little bit of a money-making venture as well. If they can ransom off access to your own systems to you, well, that's money they can put in their pockets while also causing chaos and uncertainty. From Jay in Kyiv, Russia is running a program flooding the newsrooms of 800 mainstream news outlets with fake stories and narratives to overload the verification process. And this really simply is the same problem I bump into on a regular basis. Namely, that there's one of me and there is millions of articles and posts and pictures all put out there about the Ukraine war each and every day. So if little old me is not able to keep up with all of it and I just have to kind of wholesale shuffle some things off, can you imagine a newsroom that's getting juicy narratives that they then have to vet and check, but they're getting so many of them that they have to vet each and every day? It's basically they're overwhelming the system with more crazy stuff in order to make it so that it's even harder for people in the West to understand what's going on, and they just basically throw up their hands and give up. There was an explosion of ammunition in a Czech training area. Now, there were some people wounded, and the causes were unclear as of this post. But people are looking pretty carefully at Russia for this one. It just seems awfully suspiciously timed. And I'll be watching for more information. May never get any from this one though. So let's go ahead and move on to my computer side over here. Get this switched over. And this is going to be some of the more recent information. The U.S. is concerned about closer ties between Russia and North Korea, according to the White House. And this should be one of those, yeah, no duh things. The truth is that we had North Korea pretty much isolated. This is their biggest chance to break out back into the world stage again, and they're jumping in with both feet. According to Jens Stoltenberg, the West should impose a cost on China if it keeps supporting Russia. He called for China to face consequences, accusing Beijing of worsening the Ukraine war while seeking better relations with the West, basically playing both sides. In fact, NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg even said that NATO should take steps to enhance their nuclear deterrence. Now, we've not seen this kind of talk in NATO or any of the Western nations in a very long time. I mean, I'm getting Cold War, vibes right out of this thing. And the thing is that every time we turn around, Russia's like, we're going to nuke you. We're going to nuke everybody. We're going to nuke Germany. We're going to nuke the UK. We're going to nuke, Ukraine. We're going to nuke the US. And now we're starting to see the West respond. We saw Macron with his nuclear football. We've got NATO Secretary General saying we're going to have to prepare for a nuclear exchange, not because they're expecting a nuclear exchange, but because they need to have that preparation done because there's crazy people on the other side. Speaking of NATO, according to Stoltenberg, once again, more than 20 NATO members will hit their 2% defense spending target in 2024. That's big news. It was 3, I think, back in 2014. 3 of them were meeting that target. To have 20 of the NATO members actually meet it tells you how scared everybody is getting. This whole thing is starting to get under people's nerves. Denmark is putting together plans to curb Russia's shadow fleet of oil tankers that have been leaving through the Denmark's seas right there. They're negotiating with a coalition of countries with possible measures to step in against Russia's shadow fleet of oil tankers, but they don't have any specifics just yet. Since oil is how Russia gets all their money and they need to use tankers to get it out of the country, this would be major if they can figure out a way to pull it off. Already talked about the bilateral security agreement. Moving on. Latvia sent their first batch of drones to Ukraine and is now preparing a second one. So they've been doing this fundraising and working on putting these drones together. So this is awesome for Ukraine. Drones are such a major part of this situation here, and it's amazing how much they're putting in. Already talked about the NATO nuclear weapon talk. From President of Poland, Andrzej Duda, Russia remains a colonial empire that has never gone through the path of decolonization, was unable to cope with the demons of its past. In the part of the world that I represent, meaning Poland, Russia is often called the prison of nations. And then he made this statement here. Let me just go ahead and back it up. Since Putin wants Russian soldiers to die in Ukraine in large numbers, then we must do everything possible to ensure that Mr. Putin's expectations are met. So there you go. Since Vladimir Putin's willing to throw the meat cubes at the front lines, well, then the West ought to be prepared to provide the knife and fork to take care of it. Al mentions that a lot of people forget about the border clashes China and Russia had up until the 70s. It's a volatile relationship. That's correct. And China has potentially a very legitimate claim on the eastern parts of Russia, something that Russia probably should think very carefully about before they spend too much time thinking about their claims on Ukraine. Now let's move on to the front lines. And once again, we got this information split into 2 different places. Give me a second here. Now let's pop it east. Not a lot on my cell phone. I didn't get to the front lines until later today, so I had a little bit of time to get up to current on those. Oh, dang it. I lost my translation again. This is War Gonzo's overall combat report here. Let me get the translation here. Now, War Gonzo, in case you don't remember, this is a Russian source. This is not a Western source. Dang it. Okay. There we go. Yeah. Sorry, can't do it today. War Gonzo is basically going to confirm the information I'm about to say in other places in just a moment here. So let's go ahead and move on from there. I like to kind of go through it because not everything is said by one side or the other, and I try and get to where we're doing both sides. Ukrainian soldiers have rounded up the crew and captured one of the turtle tanks. Let me pop this guy up and we'll play the video. Not much to see, but you can see Ukrainian soldiers capturing the crew there. You can see him tying up one of the soldiers there, which is kind of hard to see on that little teeny tiny screen. But overall, that's what we got going on here. Is the Ukrainians are finding ways to even take care of the big bad problems that they've been bumping into. And from Dmitry at War Translated, Rogozin posts this chart from Russian soldiers in the Robotna area showing Ukrainian drone strikes, primarily munition drops, first paragraph, and FPV drones, second paragraph, in one day. 290 munitions drops by drones and 15 FPV drones. Quite the insane number of drones to have in one area, to have one guy reporting exactly when they'd be showing up. Now let's go ahead and move back to my computer here, turn this off, and bloop. There was an ammunition depot in Belgorod that was struck today, in fact, and was cooking off pretty merrily there. The ability to strike targets in the Belgorod Oblast is really helping Ukraine to really turn the tide of the situation in Kharkiv. The Czech foreign minister states that the first shipments that they have procured under the Czech initiative to increase supplies of ammunition in Ukraine are now arriving and will continue to flow. Now, as I recall, they did have some problems with the initial shipments with not exactly a dud rate, but things that weren't quite to spec. So they had to rework some of that ammunition so it would be in line with the other stuff. But overall, we're seeing that ammunition start to flow into the battlefield. In the Serebianki forestry area, the Ukrainians have actually made some serious progress. They're pushing the Russians out of their frontline positions there, and they've advanced about a kilometer by about a kilometer and a half in that area. Now, the Serebianki forestry area is not a major strategic victory, but what it indicates is that Ukraine is starting to see that they have enough resources and supplies to do limited, targeted offensive operations and start pushing the Russians back. And this is in the east of Ukraine, even better to show that they're really jumping on with both feet to get things done. A rare Ukrainian smart bomb strike was used to cut off Russian troops in Volchansk. This would be the smart munitions that they dropped onto the aggregate plant there, where anywhere from a few dozen to a couple of hundred Russian troops have holed up. They were part of an initial group that was trying to push Ukrainian positions. And then the Ukrainians saw what they were doing, let them get to the aggregate plant, and then cut them off from Russian resupply. This has been going on for about a week now, maybe a little bit more, and they're getting pounded, and we're starting to see surrenders happening from that area. Now, that doesn't mean that everything's going in Ukraine's direction here. Russian forces made considerable gains west of Simonivka towards Novoselivka, Prussia, with multiple columns of mechanized equipment that were then repelled. So they've made progress in the relatively open areas here. On top of that, in Kremina, the Azov Brigade confirmed it did liberate that part of the Serebianki forestry. So that's a win for the Ukrainians. In the Lipsy-Lvove direction, newly geolocated footage confirms the previous assessment from Knoll reports that Ukrainian units managed to partially dislodge Russians there. Now, this is over in the Kharkiv region, and this is indicating, again, that the Ukrainians are feeling confident enough that they've got the supplies they need to start pushing back and kicking the Russians back out. With these heavy clashes inside Tlybok and this renewed offensive action, it really looks like the Ukrainians are keen to really pick up their lost positions once again. So they're really going at it. This is over at the aggregate plant area with the in Vovchansk, with the Ukrainians engaging in heavy fighting to push out Russian forces in the remaining buildings on the western part of the main road. This is the southern part of Vovchansk, where a Russian soldier is captured, when many more are trapped, as I mentioned before. Over near Soledar, inside Rozdalivka, the Russians have managed to reach farther into the village, and Knoll reports it in the gray zone. I expect within a week we're going to see this whole village captured by Russia unless something changes. And that's kind of the long story short on the front lines. A lot of little changes. But in the east, the Russians still have some initiative. In the north, the Ukrainians have taken all initiative. And I remember why I was going to show War Gonzo. War Gonzo talks about Robotina. And in Robotina, he mentions that they have lost the initiative in that area and that the Ukrainians are starting to take it back. Not that they're making any changes to the lines, so much as the situation there is entirely at a standstill as far as the lines of control. Now, I did have a few other odds and ends I wanted to talk about that popped up. Let me see if any of them are worth going through real fast. Let's see. I can skip that one, I think. Skip that one. But I don't want to skip this one. Okay, let me pull this up here. And boop. From Anton Herischenko. Now we're going into basically the interesting extras at this point. So they're not necessarily directly war related, but these ones pretty close are. 10,000 first aid kits for the Ukrainian military at her own expense. Assistance to Ukrainian orphanages and unique dumpling sandwiches. Rachel Ray, a popular American cooking show host and two-time Daytime Emmy Award winner, has already visited Ukraine 6 times since the beginning of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Each time she buys medical equipment and conducts workshops for injured Ukrainian defenders. As he says, thank you. Every time I learn of cases like this one, I feel reassurance. So many people are standing with Ukraine, are walking this path with us. Now, Rachel Ray, if you see that image there, is the dark-haired one on the left at that point of it. But this is just a media personality. And the people who support Ukraine with their own abilities, their own skills, their own money. They're investing themselves into Ukraine. And I thought that was an interesting story. Now we'll finish off with this little reminder that yesterday was Father's Day. Let me go ahead and switch this around again. This is from United 24 when we get there. And it is in English, so I'm just going to go ahead and
My dad is a guardian. He protects us from the bad guys. And my father can build a whole city in the ground.
My pops is a scientist, but he really likes to play on a computer.
I'm not scared of the dark because my daddy can fight it.
My dad is the strongest. He can drive a tank.
I saw him once fly on a very loud plane, like supersonic.
My dad has superpowers. If someone's hurt, he can cure them.
He has a very important job. When something happens, he knows first, like Batman.
My father drives a truck and brings super important artifacts for the warriors to fight evil.
He catches the rockets that fly at us with his hands. So he's very tired when he comes home. and he is super busy because there are so many rockets.
My dad is the best. I love him so much.
Eternal love to all the dads. Happy Father's Day.
Now, I am very blessed to have an amazing father, and I appreciate him very much and all the things he has done to help make me the man I am today. So this message kind of hit a little bit home for me. Just a reminder that there are fathers and brothers fighting on those front lines and trying to hold back the evil that's coming for them. So make sure you keep them in your prayers, and that they know that if you are able to, that your father knows that you love him very much. And that's everything for today. Thank you for joining me. I do appreciate it. I know this is kind of a little bit disjointed with the mix between the cell phone stuff and the regular stuff. It's going to depend on how much time I have, exactly when I'm going to be able to do these things. Hopefully the next one's not going to be 5 days of information all crammed into one video, but I really appreciate you being here for it, even so. And on that note, you have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you on the next video.